Hello, good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Theresa May has been holding a meeting of the Cabinet as she begins a two-week push to convince the country and MPs to get behind her Brexit deal. The Prime Minister's warned that rejecting the agreement with Brussels would throw the country into division and uncertainty. Well, this afternoon, Mrs May will argue her case in the Commons, where she faces a tough battle to get the deal approved. Labour and the other opposition parties have promised to vote against it, and many of her own MPs are expected to join them. Our political correspondent Ian Watson has this report.
It's really a good deal for Britain.
Yeah.
Why do you think so? Will you get it through Parliament?
Yeah, it delivers on Brexit.
24 hours after a deal was sealed in Brussels, some cabinet ministers were upbeat that it would now be backed here in Britain. And some long-standing Leave campaigners are now giving the deal their vocal approval.
It's very important that we back the Prime Minister. She secured a good deal for Britain, and it will mean that we will be able to control our borders, we'll be in charge of immigration, we'll be outside the Common Fisheries Policy and outside the Common Agricultural Policy.
And that's a script that cabinet ministers are expected to stick to, that the deal delivers on the government's promises. This will be put to the test in Parliament when MPs get their say on or around the 12th of December. Behind closed doors here at Downing Street, the Cabinet is discussing the Brexit deal. Now, we know that some of them don't like it, but in public at least, they're likely to go along with it. But 86 members of Theresa May's own party have told us that they're unlikely to support her deal. Now, some of them might simply abstain rather than vote against. She has a huge job to convince them, but over the next few weeks, her secret weapon, if you like, is you.
The Prime Minister, Theresa May.
You'll be seeing a lot more of the Prime Minister on broadcast and social media. Her hope is the public will push their politicians to get on with Brexit and back her deal.
I think all MPs will be wrestling with their consciences over the next 2 weeks and thinking hard about what their constituents actually want in a situation like this.
The thing is that anything could happen if this deal doesn't get through, and that's my concern. That's why I want to back this agreement and urge all my colleagues to do the same. Thank you very much.
But we know that many Brexiteers on the Conservative backbenches have already made their minds up about the deal, and some of those who backed Remain are prepared to vote the deal down in the hope of getting a new referendum.
It needs to go back to the British people with all the information available to them, and that they have that final say, which I think increasingly they are demanding.
And Labour rejects the Prime Minister's argument that it's her deal or no deal and are prepared to let it fall.
It's obvious she's struggling. She needs a plan B, she needs an option, and just to march on to crash in this vote without an alternative is not good enough.
But a small number of Labour MPs haven't ruled out backing the government.
So the job of the government is to look across the chamber and find a majority of MPs who will support a deal so that we can still accept the outcome of the referendum but make sure that we leave in a way that does the least economic damage to our country.
As Westminster prepares for the festive season, if MPs do reject the Prime Minister's deal just 2 weeks before Christmas, expect the season of goodwill to be put on hold. Ian Watson, BBC News.
Well, in a moment we'll go to our Europe correspondent Adam Fleming in Brussels. First, though, our chief political correspondent Vicky Young, who's in Downing Street. So, Vicky, Theresa May's big sell underway, but the odds really stacked against her.
Yes, and this cabinet meeting still going on after 2.5 hours now, and we know in the past she's had to sell it to her own cabinet, but I think the plan is to focus on the practical, focus on the pragmatic, get away from Westminster if you like, and talk to people about how her deal as she sees it will help their jobs, how it delivers freedom of movement, how it will stop those large payments to the EU. So focusing on people's real lives rather than the analysis of a legalistic and quite tense and dense text that we've had so far. Now, Labour MPs will be pretty crucial to all of this as well. They are being invited to briefings by the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff in the House of Commons, trying to win them over. And one Cabinet Minister said to me that the message to them is going to be that this is about the national interest. It's not about the self-interest of one party or another. It's about the future for the country. That's how they will hope to persuade them. But the message, as you say, is Theresa May trying to get out there, get away from Westminster, speak directly to people. We've already seen her doing phone-in. She's going to go around the country trying to get that message across. There's even been speculation about some kind of debate with Jeremy Corbyn, but of course it may look and sound a little bit like a mini general election campaign. There are some of the Conservative Party pointing out that last time round that didn't go too well for Theresa May.
OK, Vicky, thank you very much indeed. And to Adam Fleming in Brussels. Adam, what is the thinking there? Because the negotiations are over. All they can do now really is see what happens in the House of Commons.
Oh yeah, everyone here is watching what happens in Parliament, and that oh-so Westminster phrase of the meaningful vote has become common parlance here in Brussels, and the backbenchers, the prominent ones like Jacob Rees-Mogg, have become very well-known characters. Everyone knows who they are. Everyone is trying to do their own calculations for how the votes and the politics stack up. And you speak to diplomats privately over a coffee and they'll speculate with you about what happens if the vote doesn't go through or whether it will go through. But officially the policy is to not discuss the what-if questions. The EU leaders did not talk about any plan B or any speculation about what they could do if the deal fails when they had their summit yesterday. Although it was the Lithuanian president who, when she arrived, kind of gave the game away. She said, we have to be prepared for the deal failing. She said that could then lead to another referendum or maybe even another general election. The only plan B that's being discussed in Brussels at the moment is the plan B they've always had, which is either prepare for the deal to go through and do all the things you'd need to do for Brexit to happen smoothly, but also have contingency planning in the background so you can handle anything that happens if the UK crashes out without a deal. But bet your bottom euro, everyone's going to be watching BBC Parliament for the next few days.
Indeed. All right, Adam, thank you very much indeed. Adam Fleming there for us in Brussels. Well, in the EU referendum 2 years ago, the city of Leeds was split right down the middle. It voted to remain, but by one of the closest margins in the whole country. So, what do people there make of Theresa May's deal? Our correspondent Fiona Trott has been finding out.
A chilly morning at Kirkgate Market in Leeds, but a warm response to Theresa May's message. People don't want to spend any more time arguing about Brexit.
We are fed up with arguing about it, and I think everyone's fed up about Parliament always arguing about it as well. So we're fed up, and then Wales fed up with them. So 2 times fed up.
Definitely people will be fed up, you know what I mean?
Are you fed up?
Oh yes I am, because it's been ages, you know, because we still don't know where we stand.
We voted out, get out. And all the people that are whinging about it, get over it. We voted to get out, just get out.
What about businesses? The Northern Powerhouse Partnership says the feeling in this region is that this deal is better than no deal.
I think the biggest fear that businesses have is of a hard Brexit, and then the reality of that would be really damaging, not just to the northern economy, but to the national economy, because key sectors like manufacturing are really important here, but they're also really important to the UK. And that's what's pushing businesses behind the Prime Minister's deal. I don't think that there's much enthusiasm for it, but for instance, when you talk to chambers of commerce like here in Western North Yorkshire, the consensus is that they would prefer that outcome because it would give them more certainty.
What does all that mean for people here in Leeds, though, at the market, who say they are noticing the price of things going up? Is there going to be prosperity for them in the future?
I think the reality of Brexit is it's a huge distraction from what we really need to do, which is to improve productivity here in the north of England. New figures released over the weekend show that we're still seeing lower levels of growth here than in London, despite the fact that that gap's closed. But sadly, a lot of that closing of the gap is currently because all of UK growth and prosperity is being held back by people being afraid of Brexit. Despite the fact that, like in cities like here in Leeds, there's great fundamentals in the economy, people aren't investing as much as they would have done if Brexit hadn't have happened.
In this corner of northern England, which voted Remain, but only just, will they get behind the deal, or do they want a people's vote?
I think it should be a people's vote, definitely. Most certainly.
You've already had the referendum, the decision's been made, you don't want another one.
I think we've already had a people's vote. The decision was made, Brexit. My understanding of Brexit was we walk away from Europe and no deal in effect, we start again.
I don't trust any of the MPs, any of the government or anything, so I just really don't know.
So do you think then there should be a people's vote?
Like I said, I don't trust any of it. I don't trust any of it, so I don't know.
Here at the market, where Westminster, let alone Brussels, feels very far away, they seem to be backing the deal because they just want an end to negotiations. But will their MPs go along with that? Fiona Trott, BBC News, Leeds.
Well, I'll have more from Westminster a little later in the programme, but for now I'll hand you back to Clive in the studio.
Ben, many thanks for that. Now, a British academic who was jailed on spying charges in the United Arab Emirates has been pardoned and could be home tomorrow. Matthew Hedges was sentenced to life in prison last week. He's always protested his innocence, and his wife says she can't wait for him to come home after an experience she described as a nightmare. Richard Galpin's report contains some flash photography.
The 31-year-old PhD student, Matthew Hedges, will be able to return home to Britain as soon as formalities are completed, after spending months in prison in the United Arab Emirates. But despite pardoning him, the UAE government went on today to reinforce its message that Mr. Hedges had come to the country earlier this year to spy for the British intelligence agency MI6.
He was part-time PhD researcher, part-time businessman, but he was 100% a full-time Secret Service operative. During the investigation, Mr. Hedges confessed he was acting as an agent for a foreign intelligence service. He confirmed that he collected sensitive and classified information about the UAE.
Mr. Hedges' family deny all this, saying he came here to the UAE to research security and foreign policy issues for his PhD. The British government also dismisses the charges of spying which he faced.
Well, we've seen no evidence to support these accusations against Matthew Hedges, but today what we want to do is to thank them for the fact that they have reflected on the strong representations that we've made. We've made it very clear for a number of months now that we see no basis in these allegations. They've reflected on that. They've taken the action that they can, which means that Matthew Hedges is going to be reunited with his family.
For Mr. Hedges' wife, who'd campaigned hard for the Foreign Office to finally take action, it now seems the ordeal is over.
It's taken me by surprise, and I'm just so happy and so relieved and really incredulous that this is all happening finally. It's been an absolute nightmarish 6-7 months already, and I just can't wait to have him back.
The expectation is that the couple will be together again quite soon. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
NATO will convene an emergency meeting after Russian forces seized 3 Ukrainian Navy vessels in the waters off Crimea. The Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has called for martial law to be declared in response. Moscow and Kiev are blaming each other over the incident, in which a tug and 2 gunboats were captured and a number of Ukrainian crew members were injured. Both the EU and NATO have urged restraint. Our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg has the latest.
Off the coast of Crimea, Russian border guards on collision course with the Ukrainian Navy. Here, the Russians target a Ukrainian tugboat. The hint is less than subtle. Get out of these waters. There was more drama to come. Later, Russian forces shot at and seized the tug and 2 other Ukrainian vessels. This appears to be an SOS from one of the Ukrainian sailors as they storm his boat. A Russian replies. The Ukrainian vessels were towed to Russian-controlled Crimea. More than 20 Ukrainian servicemen have been detained. The incident took place near the Crimean Peninsula by the Kerch Strait. Russia says Ukraine's navy illegally entered Russian waters. Ukraine denies it. This was the reaction in Kiev. Death to Russia, he shouts. Protests and pyrotechnics outside the Russian embassy. Ukraine's president denounced what he called Russia's aggression. Petro Poroshenko will ask Parliament to approve martial law to defend Ukraine against Russia. Moscow is refusing to take the blame. Russia's foreign minister accused Kiev of provocations. Sergei Lavrov said Ukraine's leaders were trying to score political points ahead of elections. To some, the incident is a reminder of just how dangerous the Russia-Ukraine conflict is.
The war continues to be live. And the war could escalate any moment, while endanger the relationship between Russia and the West.
With its show of force yesterday at sea and in the sky over the Kerch Strait, Russia has sent a clear message to Ukraine: don't mess with Moscow. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Now, latest projections from the Met Office suggest climate change could transform Britain. It warns that if greenhouse gas emissions aren't cut, summer temperatures could rise by more than 5 degrees by 2070, and scorching summers like this year's could become normal. Well, our environment analyst Roger Harrabin is here. These look like pretty big numbers, Roger.
Oh yeah, I mean, these are the most dramatic figures that we have seen so far from this latest analysis. If we had a temperature rise of, say, 5 Celsius, which is at the extreme end, that would take us to the sort of heat levels experienced in the south of France on a typical summer August day, which is very nice if you happen to be on the beach, but is really not nice if you're doing outdoor work, or indeed particularly if you're elderly. That would be very hard to bear. And under those scenarios, the south of France would end up probably with a climate like North Africa, and North Africa like the Sahara. So that's really quite alarming. And the figure for sea level rise, well, projected as much as 1.1 metres for the London area, is really very high. And, you know, in those circumstances, we would be able to protect big cities in the UK because we're a wealthy country with sea barriers, but small communities, frankly, a lot of them will go under the waves.
So how reliable are these numbers?
Well, I mean, look, these are the most difficult equations in the world. These scientists are trying to project what the likely emissions are going to be from governments, and then on top of that, try to project what the impacts on the Earth would be. So there's a lot of uncertainty about that. The extreme temperature rises for the UK, for instance, suggest that countries are going to continue increasing greenhouse gases, which may not be likely. They've promised they wouldn't. But given President Trump's stance and President Bolsonaro in Brazil threatening to cut down the Amazonian rainforest and turn it to cattle ranching, it is plausible, and governments do have to plan for that. But even that, even let's suppose we had a scenario in which countries really try aggressively to cut greenhouse gases, the report suggests that there could still be a temperature rise in the UK of up to 2.3 Celsius by the end of the century. And that's really much higher than we thought before. And one thing, with all the uncertainties, one thing now is certain: climate change will affect us all.
OK, many thanks, Roger Harrabin. OK, our top story at 19 minutes past 1.
Had 6 failures. Then on the 7th attempt, the chief engineer was eating and sharing peanuts with the entire team.
Just one more detail in the effort to help this spacecraft land on its feet on a planet more than 90 million miles away. Victoria Gill, BBC News at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, California.
There are urgent calls for changes to the rules governing medical devices such as pacemakers after an investigation by dozens of media organisations found that some were unsafe or hadn't been properly tested. The Royal College of Surgeons now wants a register of every device given to patients so doctors can monitor them. The BBC's Panorama programme found that some implants had failed trials or had only been tested on animals. Our health correspondent James Gallagher has a story.
Medical devices are life-saving, but new does not always mean better. The investigation found implants that were approved for humans despite failing in a study on baboons, and a treatment for children with curved spines that was only tested on pigs and corpses before being approved for use in the UK. Maureen McLeave needed a pacemaker to treat an irregular heartbeat. She became the first person in the UK to be fitted with a new type of device that sits inside the heart. But the battery died just 3 years later, and doctors couldn't get it out and had to implant a second pacemaker.
I don't like the thought I've got a piece of metal or whatever in my heart that's doing nothing, and it's just laying there.
The novel pacemaker given to Maureen was later withdrawn for safety reasons. Critics say medical devices need to be tested more thoroughly before being approved, and that more evidence on the harms and benefits of devices should be made public.
And as a patient, I would be terrified not to know the adverse event data. But you have to have data in order to know if something is safe or it's dangerous. We're talking about people's lives. It's really important to know whether these devices are safe or not.
One of Britain's most senior surgeons wants drastic changes to the regulations around medical devices.
There should be registries created that are compulsory, that include every new implant, every new device that's used on a human being, and every new technology that's introduced into the care of a human being.
A Department of Health spokesperson said patient safety was its highest priority and that it would work with the regulator to see what changes may be required. The industry said millions of
Brexit. Ben, over to you.
Clive, thank you. The Prime Minister is preparing to face MPs in the Commons this afternoon after signing her Brexit deal with other EU leaders in Brussels. But she faces significant opposition to the deal from MPs across the House. So, what are the hurdles left to clear before Britain does leave the EU next March? Well, our reality check correspondent, Chris Morris, is here with me now. Chris.
Yeah, so first of all, what we had yesterday from the other 27 countries was an endorsement of the deal. Eventually, they have to sign it off formally. That can, in theory, be done by a qualified majority of EU countries, 20 out of 27. In practice, I think it's unthinkable that it wouldn't be unanimous. But before we get to that, the biggest hurdle right here, as you've been discussing throughout the programme, will it get through the House of Commons? The numbers look very difficult. If it doesn't, could the deal be renegotiated? I don't think there's any appetite. I was in Brussels yesterday for renegotiating the withdrawal agreement. The non-binding political declaration that goes with it could perhaps be tweaked a little bit, but no major changes. If it does get through Parliament here, then it also has to be ratified in the European Parliament. The signals from there are that they're relatively happy as long as citizens' rights are clarified and they're happy with what it says about that. Only if we get through all those processes do we get to the 29th of March next year when we will leave the EU. But then, of course, transition period begins, 21 months at least, when everything will stay the same. And don't forget, it's important to remember that it's only after the 29th of March next year that formal negotiations on the future arrangement, what everyone really wants to know about, can actually begin.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Well, that statement from the Prime Minister to MPs in the Commons on her Brexit deal at 3:30, full coverage on the BBC News channel. Now, though, let's go for a look at the weather with Chris Fawkes.
Thanks a lot, Ben. Well, we've got pretty quiet and still conditions at the moment across many areas of the United Kingdom. This top weather watch picture was sent to us from Topsham in Devon, the quiet before the storm, if you like, because we are going to see a change in our weather patterns over the next few days with these areas of low pressure lining up in the Atlantic. They are going to be moving towards the UK over the next couple of days. Today, most areas, though, will have a dry afternoon. The exception is eastern coastal areas of Scotland and England, with a number of showers working in here. But because there's not much in the way of wind to move those showers along, the showers generally are going to stay near to that east coast. We are also seeing a number of showers working into southern counties of Northern Ireland, but there are some breaks in the cloud around. Temperatures this afternoon between 6 and 8 degrees, so we've still got that fairly cool air with us. Now, as we go through this evening and overnight, showers could turn heavier across eastern Scotland, perhaps a bit of winteriness here over the hills. Some breaks in the cloud, and where that happens, we'll see temperatures dipping down below freezing. But generally, where we keep the cloudier weather, temperatures between 1 and 3 degrees overnight, and then changes afoot towards the southwest. Late in the night, we'll see rain moving in here, and a completely different day, actually, across the western side of the UK for Tuesday. Wet weather for southwest England, Wales and Northern Ireland. As the band of wet weather moves in, the winds are going to start to turn more to a southwesterly direction, and that's going to drag in much milder air. So temperatures 12 degrees in Plymouth, 11 in Cardiff, but jump ahead of our weather front, 9 in London and an 8 for Norwich. And in fact, to the east of our weather front, the weather's going to feel very similar to how it feels this afternoon. Still a number of showers affecting northeastern coastal areas of Scotland as well. Now, looking at the weather picture for the middle part of the week, we've got low pressure steaming in off the Atlantic, and this one has some tightly packed isobars. Yes, it is going to be a windy kind of day on Wednesday, with the gusts potentially reaching as strong as 70 miles an hour around some of our most exposed coasts and hills in the west. So we could see some disruption. It's also going to be quite a wet day with the heaviest rain working across Northern Ireland and on into Scotland. But those southwesterly winds are also going to be dragging in much milder conditions nationwide. See how the colours on the map there change. And as we go through Wednesday afternoon, we're looking at temperatures climbing to 15 degrees in Belfast and also for London. So a big change and a big jump in temperatures. Now, those strong winds will still be around, particularly across Scotland into Thursday. And as we look at the weather on through the end of the week and into the weekend, there will be some further bouts of wet and windy weather to come. However, the temperatures will stay on the mild side for most of us, well on into double figures. So a big change in the weather is on the way from the cool conditions we've got at the moment to something a lot wetter, a lot windier, but a lot milder as well. That's the latest weather. Clive.
OK, Chris, thank you. Chris Faulkser. And that's it. So goodbye from me. Now on BBC One, let's join our news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.
And here on BBC News, it's time for some sport. Hello, I'm Hugh Ferris. England have beaten Sri Lanka to win their Test series 3-0 and claim with it an away whitewash for only the third time in their history. It was closer than many expected on day 4, but Jack Leach played a significant role, producing a stunning run-out at a crucial time, as well as taking 3 more wickets. Bowled Sri Lanka out for 284 in their second innings, giving England the win by 42 runs in Colombo. The last time England swept an away series involving 3 or more tests was back in 1963.
Well, it was a really good game of cricket, wasn't it? And it took a moment of brilliance from Jack Leach, throwing that throw-in from 60 yards to hit the stumps direct run the bat by only a yard, that changed it round. And in these conditions, often 1 wicket brings 2, and that was the case. But I was struck by the look of relief on Joe Root's face when that last wicket fell. It got very, very close indeed, and the last pair together could easily have played a few shots and got over the line. But England have been the better team throughout the series, and they were good for their win here.
Ireland coach Joe Schmidt will step down after next year's World Cup, and he'll be replaced by Andy Farrell. Schmidt's taken the team up to 2nd in the world rankings. They are one of the favourites for the tournament in Japan in 2019. Farrell has been Ireland's defence coach under Schmidt after holding the same position with England up until the 2015 World Cup. It'll be his first head coach role, taking over from the New Zealander who has accomplished plenty with Ireland.
2 championships, 1 Grand Slam, a winning series in South Africa, beat the All Blacks twice, you know. But I think the fantastic thing about Joe is that he's leaving Irish rugby in a much better place. He'll commit to making sure there's a contingency plan, that he's breeding new coaches who come in and who ensure that this Irish team is going on to continue to try and be competitive at the very top level.
Lewis Hamilton has welcomed all challenges to his Formula One title next year. The Mercedes driver dominated the field in 2018 to win his 5th World Championship, but he expects his main rivals to be contesting a little more when they get back to racing.
I really welcome the competition. We welcome the competition as a team. I really hope that they're there, because I think it'll just add to the spectacle. If there was a 6-way battle between the Ferraris, Red Bull and Mercedes, that would be even closer than much closer than it's been. Say, for example, with me and us and Ferrari, with then Red Bull next year would be awesome.
Formula 3 driver Sophia Florsch says she is happy to be on her way home after the high-speed crash that left her with a fractured spine. She said she was overwhelmed by the support she'd received from fans around the world and thanked the hospital staff after crashing at around 170 miles an hour in the Macau Grand Prix just 8 days ago. She needed an 11-hour operation to repair her spine. She said she celebrated her 2nd birthday on the day of the crash and was starting a new chapter. Sir Nick Faldo has criticised Phil Mickelson and Tiger Woods' $9 million showdown at the weekend. Mickelson claimed the winner-takes-all prize in the match play event in Las Vegas. It was called The Match, and it's divided opinion amongst golf fans and players too. Faldo, who is a 6-time major champion, says everything was wrong with it.
It was just an exhibition, and then for a ridiculous amount of money. I think when they put that photograph out of them both, you know, caressing $9 million, it was like, hang on a minute, now we're going... This is not our sport. This was just an exhibition match, and it was just the wrong time. I mean, if this had been 2006, after they both won majors, and it could have been a real grudge match. But this is just 2 guys who now actually get along, and this sort of thing. Hey, the real bottom line, the real golf at the Ryder Cup, you know, Tiger and Phil couldn't get a point.
Well, that's it for now. If you'd like more, you can head to the website, of course, head to bbc.co.uk/sports. Much more reaction from Colombo on that tense but very important victory for England against Sri Lanka. And that's it from me for now. More in the next hour.
Hugh, thanks for that. Hugh Ferris there. Now, a British academic who was jailed for spying in the United Arab Emirates is out of detention and apparently on his way to the British Embassy in the UAE. That's according to a family spokeswoman. There's been a bit of confusion about Matthew Hedges' position following that announcement of his pardon earlier this morning. We weren't sure if he had been released from jail yet or when that would come, but we're now being told that he has been released from prison, according to a family spokesperson, and he is on his way to the UAE embassy and will potentially be reunited with his wife as early as later today or tomorrow. Well, here's how the UAE government made the announcement of the pardon a little earlier today.
All countries react strongly to the act of spying, as they should. We reserve the right to protect our country from any external threat. The sentence that has been handed down to Mr. Hedges is fair, considering the crime he committed. Having said that, in a world of mounting threats, we recognize just how important it is for like-minded countries to work with rather